Okay, students, hopefully this about less than 10-minute video will help you complete your comprehensive school data profile. I know each of you work, again, as I said the other night, each of you work in a little bit different context. So while we need specificity and clarity in terms of what's expected on these projects, there also needs to be a little bit of autonomy or opportunity for you to make it work in your context. So let's see if these comments might help you. The big picture seems to be a good place to start on this. What's the big picture we're looking for? Well, obviously one of the important themes of the course is to help to develop leaders who understand how to use data and understand how to inform or facilitate others' use of data, such as teachers. So certainly the profile is an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you are proficient using data. So that's certainly one of the objectives. Perhaps this helps you to think about the organization of this profile. It needs to be completed in such a fashion that others who looked at this profile would understand. They would understand the organization. They would understand the meaning and interpretation behind those data. So it's not just enough to create a profile that would be useful to you that shows that you're proficient, but part of the expectation is you're able to create something, going to our next bullet point here, that could potentially even be a reasonable resource for a school improvement team, for example, to plan the next priorities of improvement within that school. So it needs to be sufficiently organized, detailed, and clear that others could understand your work. If the work was just laying there and they picked it up, they would understand what they were looking at and the interpretations that you were making. And a fourth bullet point as part of an overview, I've posted a few articles from Bernhardt. She's not the only one. If you want to have other frameworks to use for this, that's fine, as long as you encompass the items that I've shared from Bernhardt, which would include things like needing multiple measures, dealing with intersections in the data. That's when you really begin to interpret it and break it down into a level that's really useful to you. You need to have learning data, perception data, demographic data, and process data. These data are all defined in the articles from Bernhardt that I've posted. But if there are, as I said, other individuals, researchers that you think can supplement this, feel free to include them as well. And I have asked you to provide data for 5 years so we have some longitudinal perspective. There's a 3-part rubric that's been developed. Again, I hope it has sufficient detail to give you kind of the mark that you're shooting for, but not so detailed that it's almost strangles any opportunity you have to have some creativity. But there's a section of the rubric that deals with the literature and knowledge base, a presentation and coherence section, and then there's an application section. In the literature and knowledge base, if you limit yourself to the posted Bernhardt articles, that meets my expectation for this actual project. Again, you're welcome to go outside that, but if you use Bernhardt's work and her categories and classifications and terminology, that might provide you an opportunity to frame the data and would also ensure that you're comprehensive in terms of you've not left anything out that I'm looking for. The coherence, the second part of the 3-part rubric, I hope you can see that what the work you produce needs to be organized and presented in a way that shows your knowledge of where the school's at. So a logical flow, B follows A, C follows B, A, B, C, some coherence so it's readable, useful, organized for another reader who might want to pick that up. The third part of the rubric, might be the most difficult when you begin to analyze, looking for the patterns in terms of what the data may be telling you, some meaning that may be in the data. You're beginning some interpretation. The data are suggesting to you some needs that your school may have. It suggests some priorities. And I really want you to at least get to where you're starting to look for some intersections, where some of these data cross over in multiple ways. So yes, you're going to have descriptive data, which are going to be more like raw data that simply describe what your demographics are or what your percentage of students achieving mastery on a certain exam are. Those are your descriptive data. They describe where your school's at. So certainly a good bit of this is going to be descriptive. But let's take it a notch or two beyond that, and that's where we get into this analysis piece. There's also an interpretive element to this. So if you're thinking about how to put this together, notice I'm calling this possible organization. I'm not giving you a template. I'm giving you some latitude. If you can think of a better way to meet these objectives, I would encourage you to do so. But the obvious way that comes to my mind is we have major categories that Bernhardt has identified that I've included in this assignment as my expectations that you'll provide data in that particular category. For example, demographic data. Perception data is another, for example. It seems to me a logical way to do this would be to work perhaps from from a general to a more specific pattern, but start with each of those major categories and include the descriptive data that you have. What are the 5-year student learning data that you have? Put those in their own section. You're obviously going to probably want to use some kind of tables and charts. Something other than narrative is going to be helpful to you on that descriptive part. But when you begin to do the analysis part, I think that's going to look more like a narrative. So it seems to me that the logical starting place would be to organize your data descriptively in the major categories of data, and then under each of those major categories do a section that we would consider more of the interpretive section, where you might talk about what it means, what the next steps might be for your school in that area, what patterns you're seeing, what trends you're seeing. And I would think most of your narrative or most of your interpretive data would probably be narrative. A lot of your descriptive data might be charts, graphs, pie charts, etc. And it would seem to me you might be able to conclude the entire profile with some areas where you see these intersections that are cutting across various categories of data. So perhaps to kind of think of it linearly or graphically, you might have, for example, like 6 major sections of descriptive data. You've got the perception data, the demographic data, the student learning data, etc. You might put those in 6 separate sections, and then as a subsection of each section, you might then write some narrative that points out the significant or meaningful elements within that major section. And then you could repeat that pattern, for example, 6 times, and then you might conclude the document, which would make sense to perhaps conclude with some of the more sophisticated analysis, which is probably what we would assume when you start looking across the different sections, the major sections, and see where they intersect. That would be a higher or more sophisticated level of analysis. But I want to again emphasize I'm calling this a possible organizational flow. I think you guys are probably a lot more creative. Many of you are more creative than I am. Perhaps you can think of better ways to do this. But again, to go back to our first slide content, what's the bottom line here? Demonstrate your proficiency with data. Certainly is one thing we're trying to do. Create a tool that others could understand. For example, a school improvement team, and then making sure you have all of the areas of elements, the multiple measures, that there's some discussion of intersections. You have included learning data, perception data, demographic data, and process data. Then you would be hitting a home run in terms of meeting the requirements of this assignment. This is something you're going to probably want to keep up to date for the remaining time that you're in the program, and hopefully perhaps beyond the time you're in the program. But when you put your actual lab project together, which you're going to do in your 8301 class, which many of you will be taking this summer, having this organized and ready to go is going to be a very fertile and fruitful place for you to develop your action research plan, because, as I've suggested to you in some of my other videos, in your lab experience, you're going to be participating in a project that you design with the help of others, in which we're going to try to move some of these numbers. We're going to try to increase and improve student achievement. Pardon me, I seem to have a little sore throat on this, but anyway, hopefully you got some benefit from this video, and good luck with the assignment.